Welcome back to the deep dive. Wow, you've really outdone yourself this week with this collection of industry news.
Yeah, there's a lot to unpack here.
It feels like, everything's changing so rapidly across TV, film, media in general.
Yeah, you can really see the shifts happening, right?
So we've got these industry roundups, everything from, regulatory changes in France to the rising role of AI in content creation to leadership changes, even at some pretty big media companies.
Absolutely. And it's fascinating how these stories, when you look them together, they start to paint this picture of these larger interconnected trends that are really shaping the whole industry.
Yeah. It's almost like a snapshot, right, of this dynamic period.
Right.
So our mission today is to kind of sift through this mountain of news and pull out some of the most I guess, significant, interesting developments, and then try to provide a little bit of clarity and context around what it all means.
Exactly. I think that's what we're here to do.
Okay, so let's dive in, and why don't we start with France? You had flagged this really interesting development around these new regulations for streaming platforms.
Yeah. Yeah, it's pretty significant, actually.
Yeah. What's the big picture there?
Well, I think what's notable about what France is doing is how proactive they're being in terms of trying to shape the relationship between these global streaming giants. Your Netflixes, your Amazon Primes, your Disney Pluses, your Apple TV Pluses,
Right.
and their local creative industries. They've essentially said to these platforms, look, if you're going to operate in France, you need to reinvest a significant portion of your French revenue back into French and European content.
That's pretty bold, right?
Yeah, I mean, we're talking between 20 and 25% of their revenue.
Wow.
So that's a big chunk of change.
And what kind of content are we talking about here? Like, what does that actually cover?
It's pretty broad.
Yeah.
So it covers theatrical productions, so movies for the big screen, but also television productions as well.
Gotcha.
But it's not just about the money.
Oh, okay.
They've also implemented these specific quotas that are really designed to promote French language shows,
Right.
to support independent producers,
Okay.
and to even encourage a diversity of genres being produced.
Interesting.
So it's a really clear and conscious effort to make sure that French culture continues to thrive, in this new age of global streaming, where you could very easily just get, inundated with content from other places.
Right. And it's interesting. The report kind of pointed out this observation that while, traditional broadcasters are still spending more, overall,
Right.
the streamers are really starting to focus their investments on these kind of fewer, higher budget projects.
Mm-hmm.
So what does that tell us, about how they're thinking and what their goals are?
Yeah, I think that's a really key point. It seems like the sheer volume of spending
Mm-hmm.
might still favor the traditional broadcasters, but these streamers, they're really putting their money behind these big, high profile, high production value projects.
Right.
And I think that's, partly reflective of their global ambitions, right?
Right.
They want content that can travel, that can resonate with audiences worldwide.
Yeah.
But I think it's fascinating, France has managed to get these companies, these major international players, to actually, invest so heavily in their local content.
Yeah.
It suggests that this model of regulation and quotas might actually be a really effective way to integrate these streaming giants into a domestic creative ecosystem.
Yeah.
And it makes you wonder if other countries are kind of watching this and taking notes.
Yeah, totally. Okay, so let's hop across the Atlantic. We'll go over to California, where the mood seems a little bit more uncertain, maybe.
Yeah, maybe a little less optimistic.
Yeah. And the Otis Collins report, really highlights these challenges in the entertainment job market over there.
Right. And I think, if we're going to connect this back to that global picture, we're seeing this interesting contrast where in France, you've got this, investment, this focus on local content.
Right.
And then in California, despite adding some jobs in 2024, the entertainment sector is still struggling to get back to those pre-2023 strike levels.
Yeah.
In fact, there's been about a 20% decline in employment since 2022.
Wow. Okay.
So that's a pretty significant dip.
Yeah, and the report also mentions this record low in production levels in Los Angeles.
Mm-hmm.
So what are the main factors that are kind of contributing to this downturn?
Well, it seems like there's a bunch of things converging. There's definitely a pressure on budgets across the industry.
Right.
And then you've also got, the allure of more attractive financial incentives in other states, even other countries, right? That are drawing productions away from California.
Yeah.
And then, of course, we can't forget about this ongoing consolidation within the media landscape as well.
Yeah.
That's likely having implications for hiring as well.
Yeah. So what are California lawmakers kind of doing to try and reverse this trend?
Well, it seems like their main strategy is to try to counter this by offering expanded tax incentives.
Okay.
So they've boosted those annual tax credits up to $750 million.
Wow.
And they're also offering some pretty generous subsidies, up to 35% in some cases.
Wow.
So they're really trying to make California a more, attractive and competitive location for filming again.
Right.
And hopefully revitalize that local production industry.
But the report does end on a bit of a question mark, right?
Yeah.
It's unclear whether these incentives are really going to be enough to bring everything back.
Exactly. I mean, it's a significant effort, but whether it'll fully counteract those budgetary pressures and and that appeal of those, out-of-state incentives, it's really hard to say.
Right.
The industry is going through a lot of changes,
Mm.
and it's really going to take some time to see how all of this shakes out,
Yeah.
and whether these measures can really, reignite California's production engine.
It kind of makes you wonder, how these different regional approaches,
Yeah.
like France's regulations versus California's tax breaks,
Right.
how they're going to play out in the long run and how they're going to shape, the global flow of content production in the years to come.
Yeah, absolutely. All right, so why don't we shift over to the UK now, where there's this interesting development around ethical true crime production
Mm-hmm.
and this broadcaster advisory council that's been formed. Tell us about that.
Yeah. So I think what's really noteworthy here is the formation of this Broadcaster Advisory Council.
Okay.
It's also known as the BAC for short.
And it's been set up under the umbrella of the Association of True Crime Producers, or ATCP.
Got it.
And what makes this particularly interesting, I think, is that all of the major UK broadcasters,
Oh,
so the BBC, ITV, and Channel 4 have all signed on.
oh wow.
So you've got this unified front from the biggest players,
Yeah.
and it really seems to signal that the industry's taking these ethical considerations really seriously.
So what's kind of prompted this increased focus on ethical guidelines in true crime now?
Well, I think the primary driver seems to be this growing emphasis on victim-centered storytelling.
Okay.
In a genre that can often be quite sensitive, right?
Yeah.
So the BAC is really aiming to establish and promote best practices across the entire industry.
Okay.
And this includes, a really strong focus on duty of care,
Right.
not just for the victims and their families, who are often re-traumatized by these productions, but also for the producers themselves,
Right.
who are dealing with this really, difficult and emotionally taxing material day in and day out.
Yeah.
There's also, a clear commitment to ensuring compliance with ethical standards,
Right.
in terms of how these stories are told, how evidence is gathered, how interviews are conducted, things like that.
Yeah, that makes sense. And the report mentions this guy, Ian Rumsey of ITN, as the chair of this council.
Yeah, he's a well-respected figure in the industry.
So, I mean, what will they actually be doing? Like, how will they operate?
So the plan is that the BAC will meet regularly to discuss, all of these key issues, from duty of care,
Yeah.
to producer welfare, to so this BAC is kind of like a concrete step towards achieving that broader mission, specifically within, the true crime genre.
Yeah, yeah.
And I think what we're seeing here is the industry really trying to self-regulate,
Right.
in response to this growing public and critical scrutiny around true crime content.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, so let's move from these really serious ethical considerations to something a little bit more unexpected, maybe.
A little more lighthearted, perhaps.
Yeah, exactly. And that is the emergence of these AI-generated fake movie trailers on YouTube.
Right?
This is kind of a curveball, right?
Yeah, it's definitely a new and interesting development.
So tell us a little bit more about that.
Well, we're seeing a growing number of these trailers popping up online.
Okay.
And the example of this recent Superman teaser
Right.
really highlights just how how sophisticated this technology is becoming.
Yeah.
They're blending real, existing footage with entirely AI-created scenes.
Yeah.
And it's becoming increasingly difficult to tell the difference.
Yeah, and the report even said some viewers can't even distinguish them from the, official trailers,
Exactly.
which is, on the one hand, pretty impressive,
Yeah.
but, on the other hand, maybe a little concerning.
It definitely raises some questions.
Yeah, totally.
And, the technology is obviously advancing at a really rapid pace.
Right.
But I think what's particularly noteworthy here is how some of the major studios are reacting.
Okay.
Like Warner Brothers Discovery, for example.
Right.
Instead of immediately cracking down,
Yeah.
with copyright claims,
Mhm.
they've actually started to monetize these videos.
Oh, wow.
So it's a very, pragmatic approach.
Yeah.
And it might even be a sign of the times.
Yeah. Yeah. So, what are some of the I guess the main issues that are being raised by this trend?
Well, I think the primary concerns,
Yeah.
they really revolve around intellectual property, right?
Yeah.
The unauthorized use of existing characters and footage.
Right.
And then, there's also the potential impact on official marketing campaigns to consider.
Yeah.
If audiences are being bombarded with all these convincing fake trailers,
Right.
it could actually dilute the impact of the studio's own promotional efforts.
Right.
And it really kind of blurs the lines between fan-made content
Right.
and what could be perceived as officially sanctioned productions.
Right. Yeah.
Especially when, you've got creators who are actually profiting from what amounts to unauthorized use of IP.
Right.
So it raises some really interesting questions about the future of media ownership and creative control in this age of AI where these tools are so readily available.
Yeah, totally. Okay, so let's shift gears a little bit and talk about the world of Black-owned media. And specifically the vision of Datavia Samuels, the CEO of Revolt.
Yeah.
He seems to be navigating a period of really significant change.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, he's leading Revolt through this really dynamic landscape.
Yeah.
Dealing with the ongoing disruption of those traditional pay TV models.
Right.
And also grappling with these complex, social and cultural issues.
Yeah.
So it's a lot to juggle.
And then on top of that, there's been this structural change at Revolt with the move to employee ownership.
Yeah.
After Sean Combs' departure, which is, I mean, that's a pretty unique move in the media world, right?
It is. It's not something you see very often.
Yeah.
And it could signal, a real fundamental shift in the company's, values and direction.
Right.
But it seems like Samuel's strategy is heavily focused on expanding Revolt's presence on these digital platforms, right?
Wow.
So your YouTubes, your TikToks.
Right.
And I think that makes a lot of sense as a way to really directly reach and engage, a diverse younger audience, right? Where they're already spending their time.
Yeah.
So, it's about meeting the audience where they are.
Yeah.
And making sure that Revolt remains, relevant and a voice that resonates with that next generation.
So it's really about that digital growth, right?
Yeah.
To ensure that Revolt remains, a relevant voice, a strong voice in this evolving media ecosystem.
Exactly. It's about making sure that Revolt continues to be a dynamic and influential force, not just, within that traditional cable television space,
Right.
but also in this increasingly dominant digital media landscape.
Yeah.
And you see this push toward digital, across many different media companies.
Right.
But I think Revolt's employee-owned structure adds this really unique element to their approach.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, so let's stay on this theme of what's capturing audience attention.
Okay.
And the report kind of touched on how so many of the current hit TV series are really kind of tapping into this pervasive sense of modern anxiety that seems to be out there. So can you talk to us a little bit more about that?
Yeah, it is striking how many popular shows, think of series like Severance,
Yeah.
The Boys, Squid Game.
Right.
They're all exploring these themes that really seem to resonate with the unease that many people are feeling in society today.
Yeah.
We're seeing these narratives centered around, surveillance,
Yeah.
economic inequality,
Right.
the power of corporations, right?
Right.
These are all very, present and real anxieties that people are dealing with.
Yeah.
And these shows are reflecting those anxieties back to us.
Right. And it's often in these really, kind of exaggerated, even dystopian scenarios. Mm-hmm.
And yet that seems to be what's really drawing viewers in. Why do you think that is?
Well, I think these shows often act as this distorted mirror, right? They reflect those underlying fears and anxieties that many of us are feeling, but they do it in this kind of heightened, almost surreal way.
Yeah.
And I think in a time of, so much instability and uncertainty in the real world, these fictional worlds allow us to kind of explore these concerns
Yeah.
in a safe space.
Yeah.
In a cathartic way,
Right.
by pushing these anxieties to the extreme, by kind of, showing us the worst case scenario.
Yeah.
The shows can actually help us process
Right.
and maybe even find a way to cope with the challenges of our own reality.
Yeah, I think that makes a lot of sense. Okay, so let's turn back to the inner workings of Hollywood for a second.
Okay.
And the report mentioned this kind of interesting thing that writers are actually reconsidering their long-standing opposition to mini rooms. Yeah, that was a bit of a surprise.
So what's driving this change of heart?
Well, traditionally Hollywood writers have been, pretty wary of mini rooms.
Okay.
And this is primarily out of concern that they could lead to lower pay.
Right.
And reduced job security.
Okay.
The traditional model was that you had a more substantial writer's room.
Right.
That would stay involved throughout the entire production process.
Got it.
But it seems like the current climate in the industry is kind of prompting, a bit of a reevaluation of that stance.
So what's kind of shifted? Like why are they reconsidering it now?
Well, there are a couple of things going on. First of all, we're just seeing fewer shows overall being commissioned these days.
Okay.
Right?
Yeah.
And then there are often these much longer waits between a show being greenlit
Yeah.
and actual production beginning.
Right.
So in this kind of, more risk-averse environment that we're seeing.
Yeah.
Some writers are actually starting to view mini rooms as potentially a more practical way to secure employment.
Okay.
And to keep projects moving forward.
Right.
Even if it's in a more limited, initial capacity.
Gotcha.
So it's a sign, I think, of how these economic pressures are really forcing adaptations, even in pretty established industry practices.
Yeah, that's a good point. Okay, so let's get a little bit of perspective from the production side of things now.
Okay.
Johannes Jensen, the head of scripted at Banijay, offered some really interesting insights into the evolving landscape of TV drama.
Right.
So what are some of the key takeaways from his perspective?
Oh, I think Jensen's perspective is particularly interesting, given this backdrop of consolidation and cost cutting,
right,
that we're seeing across the industry.
Yeah.
He's really emphasizing the need for flexibility and innovation in how productions are put together.
Yeah.
So he's highlighting the importance of finding diverse financing models.
Right. Yeah.
Right. Fostering these international collaborations, to pool resources and creative talent.
Right.
And really being open to partnerships with non-traditional players in the media space.
Okay.
But, despite all of the challenges,
yeah,
I think his underlying message is that the fundamental demand for compelling storytelling,
right,
that hasn't gone away.
right.
That's still there. It's just the ways in which that storytelling is being financed and produced that are changing.
Okay, that's a good point. Okay, so now the report dedicates a pretty good amount of attention to this year's Series Mania event in Lille, which really seems to have solidified its position as a major event, a major player on the global television stage.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
Series Mania has really grown from significant TV festival into this truly crucial full-fledged market.
Right.
This year's edition was particularly I think vibrant, right?
Yeah.
With packed forums, a number of these high-profile series launches.
Yeah.
Kaylee Cuoco's Vanished was one that really made some headlines.
Right.
And I think it really underscores Europe's increasing prominence in the global television landscape.
And there were some interesting trends that emerged from the event as well, right?
Absolutely.
Like the growing role of public broadcasters, for one.
Yeah, that was a big one.
Yeah.
It's remarkable that public broadcasters are now leading the commissioning of about 80% of the new series that were showcased there.
Wow.
So it really highlights, their continued vital role in funding
Yeah.
and shaping, the kind of content that's being produced, particularly in Europe.
Yeah.
And this increased activity from the public broadcasters, it's attracting a lot of attention from international producers.
Right.
Who are looking for co-production opportunities, as budgets become tighter across the board.
Right.
So it's kind of a win-win situation.
Yeah, absolutely. And the panels at Series Mania covered some really relevant topics as well. AI, the continued popularity of crime dramas,
Yeah.
the kind of evolving relationship between U.S. and European streaming services.
Right.
So what were some of the key discussions that came out of those panels?
Well, AI was a big one.
Yeah.
Right. Its potential to help reduce production costs was a major talking point.
Okay.
As was the sustained audience appetite for socially relevant crime dramas.
Right.
The genre just doesn't seem to be going away anytime soon.
Yeah.
But I think what's interesting is that there were also these discussions about a potentially widening gap in priorities and strategies between U.S. and European streaming services.
Okay.
Which I think reflects, these different market realities.
Right.
And the different regulatory environments that we've been talking about.
Yeah, absolutely. And the report also highlights some specific strategies that different companies were kind of talking about at Series Mania.
Right.
So Disney Plus France, for example, seems to be prioritizing quality over quantity.
Yeah, that was a big takeaway from their presentation.
Yeah.
They're focusing on developing, fewer but higher quality original series.
Right.
With strong production values and international appeal.
Okay.
And, becoming Karl Lagerfeld was kind of the example that they kept coming back to.
Got it.
And they're also actively pursuing, co-production partnerships with established French broadcasters.
Right.
Like TF1 and France Televisions.
Yeah.
So they're collaborating on shows like Ghosts, Lucky Luke.
Okay.
So this collaborative approach,
right,
I think is becoming a really key strategy for navigating this increasingly competitive market.
Yeah. Yeah. Now, M6, the French broadcaster, they continue to be a topic of sale discussions,
Right.
even though there seem to be some pretty significant regulatory hurdles in the way.
Yeah, it's been a long and winding road for M6 in terms of a potential sale.
Yeah.
But David Larramendi, the CEO, he reaffirmed that there's still this ongoing interest.
Okay.
Even though the regulatory delays mean that a sale can't happen until 2032.
Oh, wow.
So, they're in this kind of holding pattern.
Right.
But he emphasized the need for further consolidation within the French media market.
Okay.
And he highlighted M6's strategic focus on, developing local productions.
Right.
Co-financing, scripted content. Belphegor was one of the shows that they mentioned.
Okay.
And really investing in technology.
Right.
And streaming partnerships.
Gotcha.
As being key to their future competitiveness.
Okay. Now, the conversation around AI at Series Mania, it seems like that was particularly, insightful.
Yeah, a lot of interesting perspectives there.
And Eric Barmack from Wild Sheep Content,
Right.
He's a former Netflix executive.
Mm-hmm.
He had some really interesting things to say.
Yeah, and I think what's fascinating is that he's really emphasizing this view of AI,
Yeah.
not as a threat to creativity, but as this powerful tool,
Right.
that can actually enhance efficiency and potentially reduce costs across the production process.
Okay.
He pointed out how AI could assist smaller teams in managing these large-scale projects
Right.
by streamlining tasks like script summarization,
Okay.
subtitling, dubbing, even initial storyboard creation.
Interesting.
So his argument is that, embracing AI ethically and responsibly is really crucial for the industry to remain competitive.
Right.
Without undermining, those core creative endeavors that really drive, the heart of storytelling.
Okay. And then finally from Series Mania, the European Broadcaster Alliance, New 8,
Yes.
announced a second slate of these cross-border drama co-productions,
Hmm.
which, I think speaks to this really significant push towards greater collaboration
Yeah.
in European content creation.
Oh, absolutely. I
Yeah.
mean, this alliance of public broadcasters from, countries like Sweden, Denmark.
Yeah.